On the afternoon of September 14th, 1978, inside a normal, unremarkable McDonald's tucked against the noise of U.S. Route 1 in Alexandria, Virginia, something quietly unfolded that would soon detonate into one of the most unexpected counterintelligence discoveries of the late Cold War. It was a period when the United States and the Soviet Union were entrenched in a global chess match, an era defined not just by missiles and treaties, but by shadows, whispers, and the invisible war fought between intelligence services. Washington, D.C., with its dense concentration of diplomats, contractors, military personnel, and bureaucrats, was the nerve center of this struggle. Soviet intelligence knew that if America had a heartbeat, it pulsed within a 20-mile radius of the capital, and the Soviets were always listening. The McDonald's in question stood wedged between a gas station and a strip mall, surrounded by the mundane rhythm of suburban life. Government workers bought quick lunches before returning to their classified offices. Pentagon subcontractors picked up coffee before meetings. It was the perfect place for espionage to hide, not in the shadows, but in the noise of everyday life. And yet, for all the sophistication of Soviet operations, it wasn't the CIA, NSA, or FBI that first sensed something was wrong. It was a 23-year-old fast food employee named Patricia Martinez. Patricia had worked at the restaurant for about a year. She took orders, cleaned tables, stocked napkins, duties that required neither security clearance nor awareness of the Cold War's hidden battleground. But fate often chooses unlikely people to become the first domino in history's chain reaction. Around 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, while making her rounds with a rag and cleaning spray, Patricia noticed a man, mid-40s, dark suit, glasses, sitting alone in a booth near the back. Nothing unusual at first. McDonald's saw dozens of men like him daily. But he ate slowly, watching the door more than his food, glancing at his watch with the controlled patience of someone waiting for something predictable. 20 minutes later, a second man entered. Younger, maybe late 30s, heavier build, darker hair. He ordered at the counter, sat on the opposite side of the dining room, and ate silently. No eye contact with the older man, no greeting, no acknowledgement of any kind. To the untrained eye, they were strangers passing through the same space. But tradecraft, especially Soviet tradecraft, thrives on appearing ordinary. Patricia continued wiping tables, glancing occasionally at both men. The younger one finished his meal first. He collected his trash, folded it neatly into a brown McDonald's paper bag, and walked toward the exit. Except he didn't throw the bag away. Instead, he set it gently on top of the trash bin, not in it, before walking out without a backward glance. A subtle act, nearly invisible in its simplicity. Seconds later, the older man stood, walked directly to the bin, picked up the same bag, and exited the restaurant. For a moment, Patricia simply froze, rag in hand. Had she really seen what she thought she saw? Maybe they were friends. Maybe he accidentally left something in the bag. Maybe it was nothing at all. And in 1978, in the middle of a busy shift, it was easy to dismiss anomalies as coincidences. She finished her workday, and the memory faded, until it happened again 3 weeks later. On October 5th, the scene replayed with mechanical precision. Older man first, younger man later. Same booths, same timing, same non-communication, same transfer of the brown bag. This time, Patricia's instincts pulsed louder. This wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. That night, she told her brother Michael, a security guard at a federal office building in Arlington. If anyone would take her seriously, she thought, would be someone who worked near government security protocols. But Michael laughed it off. The idea that spies were using a McDonald's in Alexandria seemed absurd, even comical. During the late 1970s, Americans were used to imagining espionage in Berlin, Moscow, or Vienna, not in a fast food restaurant off Route 1. Yet, ironically, that misconception was exactly why the location worked so well. Patricia let the conversation drop, but internally she refused to dismiss it. She had watched enough to know the pattern wasn't accidental. If it happened again, she decided, she would watch even more carefully. The opportunity came on October 26th. This time, Patricia enlisted her co-worker and friend, 22-year-old Lisa Harmon. Together, they quietly positioned themselves to observe without drawing attention. And once again, the choreography unfolded. The younger man arrived, sat, ate, and prepared his trash. Except this time, something new happened. Just before folding the bag, he removed something small from his jacket, too small to identify from a distance, and placed it inside. This was no forgotten item. It was a delivery. As the younger man placed the bag on the bin and walked out, Patricia and Lisa exchanged a look of silent alarm. They had just witnessed a live transfer, likely documents or film. The older man retrieved it seconds later, keeping his expression neutral, as if trained not to betray the importance of his actions. For the two employees, the situation had escalated from strange to dangerous. And in an age defined by Soviet infiltration, the Walker spy ring, CIA moles, KGB illegals, the possibility that an active intelligence operation was unfolding in front of them was no longer far-fetched. It was logical. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia and Lisa planned what to do next. Their decision to intervene directly was bold and risky. They had no training, no protection, and no backup. But on November 9th, Patricia executed the plan. After the younger man dropped his bag, she snatched it, buried it in the trash, tied the bag shut, and carried it toward the back room. What she didn't expect was that the older man would confront her. He approached calmly but firmly, insisting the bag was his, an extraordinary breach of tradecraft that suggested panic. Patricia played innocent, citing health codes, offering refunds, remaining steady even as her heart raced. Eventually, the older man retreated, shaking his head, leaving the restaurant faster than he had entered. In the back room, Patricia and Lisa tore open the trash bag. Inside the brown paper bag, beneath wrappers and napkins, they found 2 small photographs, black and white images of government documents, typed data, diagrams, official stamps, classified material, proof of espionage. Proof that they had stumbled into the middle of the Cold War. They contacted the FBI that same afternoon. This was the moment the quiet afternoon at McDonald's became a federal counterintelligence case. When Patricia and Lisa walked into the FBI field office in Alexandria on the morning of November 10th, 1978, neither understood the scale of what they were about to trigger. To them, it was still a strange, unsettling incident. Something suspicious, yes, but perhaps not world-altering. For the FBI, however, once the photographs were laid on the table and examined under the harsh fluorescent lights, the shift was immediate and unmistakable. These were not mere office memos or technical manuals. These were images of documents tied directly to America's satellite reconnaissance programs, the crown jewels of Cold War intelligence. During the late 1970s, reconnaissance satellites were critical to preventing nuclear war. They provided early warning capabilities, tracked Soviet missile deployments, and offered strategic insight into Soviet movements globally. Their design, specifications, and operational details were among the most guarded secrets in the Department of Defense. Any leakage, even fragments, had the potential to shift the balance of power. That the Soviets had been receiving such material for years, passed through a McDonald's of all places, was an indictment of how vulnerable even the most powerful intelligence apparatus could be. The FBI moved quickly. Special Agent Richard Kellerman, a seasoned counterintelligence officer deeply familiar with Soviet methods, was assigned to lead the investigation. Kellerman was known for his calm precision, a man who understood that the Soviets preferred slow, methodical intelligence operations that blended into the background noise of American life. When he reviewed Patricia's account, the choreography of the exchanges, and the material found, his assessment was swift. Classic KGB SVR tradecraft, a dead drop disguised as nothing more than a lunch break. By November 15th, a multi-agency task force had formed. Their objectives were clear: identify the younger man, the source, identify the older man, the handler, and dismantle the operation. But the FBI didn't fully grasp what they were walking into. Espionage networks in Washington were rarely isolated. They were nodes in larger webs, sometimes overlapping, sometimes compartmentalized, always deliberately opaque. The first step was surveillance. From November the 16th onward, the FBI deployed rotating undercover agents inside the McDonald's, blending in as commuters, office workers, and students grabbing a late lunch. Outside, unmarked sedans maintained discreet presence along Route 1. The next expected exchange should have occurred within 2 to 3 weeks. Espionage, after all, required consistency. But the days slipped by with no sign of either man. For the first week, the team remained patient. By the second, frustration grew. Had the confrontation spooked the handler? Had the Soviets sensed danger? Kellerman reminded his team that espionage is not television. It is slow, invisible, and maddening. Soviet operatives were infamous for abandoning sites for months the moment suspicion arose. Yet he believed this network might still make another attempt. Spy operations, especially long-running ones, often rely on routines that become hard to abandon. He was right, at least partially. On December 7th, 1978, just after 1 p.m., the younger man walked into the McDonald's. The undercover agent positioned near the counter recognized him instantly from Patricia's description. And almost immediately, it became clear that the man was nervous. His eyes darted around the restaurant. He shifted in his seat. He ate quickly. His anxiety radiated from him like static electricity. This wasn't the confident, methodical behavior Patricia had described. Something had changed. Something had gone terribly wrong in the network. The older man never showed. For 15 tense minutes, the younger man waited, scanning customers with quiet desperation. Then he abruptly left, trash still on the table, and headed toward the parking lot. FBI vehicles activated mobile surveillance the moment he stepped outside. The tale was executed with textbook precision. The man walked 3 blocks to a small parking lot, entered a late-model sedan, and drove through Alexandria toward the residential neighborhoods off Seminary Road. After 20 minutes, he parked in front of a modest apartment complex. Agents discreetly recorded the address, building number, and license plate before breaking off surveillance to avoid detection. A DMV search later identified the car's owner, David Allen Becker, age 38, employed by Systems Analysis Corporation, a defense contractor with classified DoD contracts. On paper, Becker was everything a spy recruiter could hope for: access, stability, no major red flags, predictable patterns, and a clearance level that unlocked sensitive reconnaissance data. He was, as intelligence agencies often noted, an ideal vulnerability, not suspicious enough to draw attention, yet valuable enough to exploit. Over the next 2 weeks, surveillance teams monitored Becker's movements, his workplace, and his apartment building. Meanwhile, the McDonald's remained under observation in case the handler attempted to re-establish the drop. But by December 21st, it was clear. The handler had vanished. The KGB had likely realized something was wrong the moment the dead drop failed on November 9th. Soviet intelligence doctrine emphasized one rule above all: when compromised, sever the line and disappear. The FBI couldn't risk waiting any longer. On December 23, 1978, in the icy early morning hours, FBI agents executed a federal arrest and search warrant on Becker's apartment. Becker was apprehended quietly as he stepped outside to leave for work, caught between routine and ruin. Inside his apartment, agents discovered exactly what they feared and expected: a 35mm camera, rolls of undeveloped film, handwritten notes containing technical details he should never have possessed outside classified environments, and hidden in a kitchen cabinet, nearly $8,000 in cash wrapped in rubber bands. Payment? Loyalty bought. The case was no longer hypothetical. It was espionage, in its purest Cold War form. At the FBI office, Becker initially refused to talk, but when the evidence piled up in front of him like a collapsing wall, his silence began to crack. After hours of interrogation, Becker finally agreed to cooperate. Over several days, he described how he met his handler, known only as Victor, during a series of orchestrated casual encounters in DuPont Circle. How Victor approached him with ideological arguments, how financial desperation pushed him toward betrayal, how the dead drop system using McDonald's bags and trash bins was designed because it left no surveillance footprint. To the frustration of investigators, Becker knew almost nothing that could identify Victor. No last name, no residence, no personal details. Soviet operatives operated behind layers, aliases, cutouts, signals. Victor had revealed nothing except his face. Even his accent, Becker claimed, was indeterminate. Eastern European, perhaps Russian, maybe Polish or Czech. Kellerman realized the grim truth. Victor was likely deep cover, trained, protected, and now gone. The FBI decided on its last possible move: use Becker as bait. Lure Victor out of hiding with forged documents and a replicated dead drop. If Victor was still in the region, he might check the signaling system. He might respond. Or he might never return. On January 9th, 1979, the red tape signal went up. The FBI set the trap and waited. On the morning of January 11th, 1979, the FBI prepared for what they knew could be their final opportunity to catch the Soviet handler, known as Victor. The red tape signal placed on the designated mailbox along Route 1 2 days earlier should, under normal circumstances, elicit a response. The Soviets had engineered a flawless system, simple enough to avoid suspicion, yet coded enough that only 2 people on Earth knew what each mark meant. But after the November mishap, the chances of Victor returning were uncertain at best. Still, Kellerman insisted they test the system. In espionage, you take the shot, even if the odds whisper against you. The FBI's forged documents were ready, carefully crafted replicas of classified satellite reconnaissance data, authentic-looking enough to satisfy a trained intelligence officer, but strategically altered to reveal nothing useful. Every diagram, every data table, and every signature block had been meticulously engineered in partnership with the Defense Intelligence Agency. If Victor took the bait, the United States would suffer no compromise. But getting Victor to the drop site, that was the real challenge. January 11th arrived cold and gray, the kind of winter day that wrapped the McDonald's in a dull, icy stillness. FBI agents in plain clothes began quietly assembling around 10:30 a.m. 2 agents took seats in the dining area, blending seamlessly with the lunchtime crowd. One pretended to review paperwork while nursing a coffee. The other read a newspaper. 3 more agents remained outside, parked across the lot in nondescript sedans, engines off to avoid suspicion. The surveillance van sat across the street, antenna hidden, interior glowing with radio monitors and the hum of anxious anticipation. Patricia and Lisa were working that day. Both were briefed not to behave differently, not to look around too much, and not to acknowledge the agents unless absolutely necessary. The 2 young women carried trays, handed out orders, and cleaned tables as if it were any other Thursday. But they felt the pressure. They knew they were part of something larger, something that stretched far beyond Alexandria, far beyond Virginia, far beyond anything they could have imagined when they first started their shifts months ago. They were in the middle of a Cold War operation. Just after 2 p.m., right on schedule, David Becker entered the restaurant. His demeanor was appropriately neutral, behaving exactly as the FBI had instructed. He ordered food, picked a booth near the center of the dining room, and ate with unhurried, almost methodical motions. He had rehearsed every step with agents dozens of times. In espionage, routine is the camouflage. Any deviation, any hesitation, any excessive caution could betray the presence of surveillance. Becker knew that if Victor sensed something was off, he would vanish forever. At 2:38 p.m., Becker stood, collected the fake documents placed inside a McDonald's paper bag, and walked toward the trash bin near the exit. Undercover agents watched through lowered eyelids. Patricia, wiping the counter, pretended not to notice. Becker placed the bag gently on top of the bin, precisely as he had done for more than 2 years, and exited the restaurant. This was the moment of truth. If Victor was nearby, he would retrieve the bag within minutes. The FBI held its collective breath. 1 minute passed. Nothing. 2 minutes. A family entered the restaurant, a child pointing excitedly at the bag, only to lose interest and follow his parents. 5 minutes. The dining area buzzed with ordinary life. Fries, soda, conversations, laughter. But for Kellerman and his team in the surveillance van, each passing second felt like a door closing. 10 minutes. Still no Victor. 15 minutes. Kellerman leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes locked on the monitor showing the restaurant entrance. He knew what this meant. In almost every successful KGB operation disrupted by Western counterintelligence, the Soviets' first move was always the same: vanish. They never returned to compromised locations. They never attempted to salvage dead drops once a block appeared. Tradecraft demanded silence, distance, and disappearance. 20 minutes passed. It was over. Kellerman finally ordered the operation terminated. One of the undercover agents inside casually stood from his booth, walked to the trash bin, retrieved the untouched bag, and left the restaurant as if discarding forgotten garbage. Outside, the unmarked sedans quietly dispersed. The surveillance van's lights went dark. The trap had failed. But this didn't mean defeat. It meant that Victor was more disciplined than they hoped, and more cautious than they feared. Over the next 3 weeks, the FBI kept teams posted at the McDonald's on Thursday afternoons. They checked the mailbox and the utility pole for chalk marks in case Victor attempted to reinitiate contact. But nothing happened. No signals, no sightings, no anomalies. Victor had evaporated, just like a well-trained KGB officer would. Behind the scenes, the search for Victor continued. The FBI attempted to match Becker's physical description with hundreds of Soviet officials, embassy personnel, diplomats, known to be intelligence officers, and deep-cover operatives cataloged by counterintelligence units. But the KGB was skilled at crafting legends, fake identities so complete that even their paperwork appeared legitimate. If Victor had been operating under diplomatic cover, he likely left the country soon after the November incident, shielded by diplomatic immunity. If he were deep cover, with no official Soviet ties, he could still be somewhere in the U.S., living an ordinary life, blending in, invisible. To Kellerman, this was the most frustrating aspect. A ghost had slipped inches from their grasp. Meanwhile, with Victor gone, the only remaining target was David Becker. In March 1979, Becker faced multiple charges under federal espionage statutes. His attorney argued that Becker had been coerced, manipulated by a foreign intelligence officer, and that financial hardship had weakened his resistance. Prosecutors countered with the devastating truth. Becker had taken thousands of dollars in payment, had willingly photographed highly sensitive materials, and had continued doing so over years. His cooperation, while useful, had led nowhere. No handler captured, no network exposed. On April 12, 1979, the judge sentenced Becker to 18 years in federal prison. It was lenient by espionage standards because he pleaded guilty, but stern enough to reflect the gravity of his betrayal. Becker would ultimately serve 11.5 years before being released on parole in November 1990, nearly at the end of the Cold War itself. But the story didn't end in court. For the intelligence community, the case became a study in the vulnerability of routine places. It revealed how espionage could exploit the most ordinary environments. Intelligence briefings in the 1980s frequently cited the McDonald's dead drop as a reminder that the biggest threats sometimes hide in the smallest corners. The McDonald's in Alexandria continued operating for 2 more decades, its customers forever unaware that within its walls, a covert chess match had played out between rival superpowers. And yet, the unresolved question lingered. Who was Victor? Even after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, even after archives opened and former operatives defected, no one ever came forward with credible information linking any known Soviet officer to the Alexandria case. It remained a Cold War ghost story, except it was real. A handler vanished, a network died, and a global power struggle had brushed against ordinary American life in the most unexpected place, a fast food restaurant. In the aftermath of Becker's sentencing, the U.S. intelligence community did what it always does when a breach occurs. It dissected every detail, every decision, every oversight that allowed a foreign power to siphon classified information without detection for more than 2 years. What emerged was a sobering realization, not just about Becker, but about the systemic blind spots that made such operations possible. It forced agencies to confront an uncomfortable truth. During the late 1970s, the Soviets were exploiting America's complacency, embedding themselves in the daily rhythms of the nation, hiding not behind shadows, but behind routines so ordinary that no one ever questioned them. The McDonald's case was small by Cold War standards. No nuclear launch codes, no military secrets that would alter the trajectory of the superpower rivalry. But that did not make it insignificant. Espionage is not always about spectacular secrets. Sometimes it is about accumulation, technical details, reconnaissance data, specifications that build toward a larger intelligence picture. The documents Becker leaked helped the Soviets assess U.S. reconnaissance capabilities, understand satellite vulnerabilities, and evaluate how the United States gathered strategic intelligence. Even partial insights into that world held immense value for Soviet planners. What alarmed investigators most was the elegance of Victor's system, not by its complexity, but by its simplicity. Western intelligence tended to romanticize spycraft, microdots, encrypted messages, invisible ink. But the Soviets understood that the best cover was the mundane. A brown paper bag in a McDonald's, a utility pole chalk mark, a piece of red tape on a mailbox. It was unremarkable, undetectable, and therefore nearly perfect. After the trap failed in January 1979, the FBI expanded its review beyond Becker. They cross-referenced thousands of pages of surveillance logs, embassy rosters, diplomatic personnel files, and lists of suspected KGB officers known to operate under various covers. Analysts pored over photographs from social events at the Soviet embassy in Washington. They examined travel records, trying to pinpoint which known operatives left the country immediately after the November 9th failed pickup. But nothing lined up neatly. If Victor had diplomatic protection, he likely flew out within days, his exit shielded from scrutiny. If he was an illegal, an undercover officer with no official ties to Soviet institutions, then he would be infinitely harder to track. Illegal operatives were the KGB's most elite intelligence officers. They lived under false identities, constructed from fabricated birth records and life histories, blending into their host countries as immigrants, academics, laborers, or businessmen. If Victor belonged to this category, he would have had no visible connection to the Soviet embassy, making him effectively invisible. These were the operatives trained to live in silence for decades. The United States would not confirm the existence of some illegals until years after the Cold War ended. And if Victor truly disappeared after November 1978, the case was likely over forever. Yet, even with Victor's vanishing act, the FBI continued prodding at Becker's past, his patterns, his vulnerabilities. They conducted psychological analyses, attempting to understand why he had been so susceptible to Victor's recruitment. Becker was not unique. He was the prototype of what Soviet officers called a walk-in by pressure. Not someone who volunteered, not someone ideologically motivated, but someone whose personal or financial strain made them open to persuasion. The KGB had a term for this kind of recruit: the quiet asset. Someone who could be molded, nudged, and exploited, often without fully realizing the scope of what they were doing until it was too late. Becker revealed to investigators how Victor had slowly built their relationship. There were no sudden offers, no overt coercion. Instead, Victor spent weeks cultivating trust, learning Becker's anxieties and ambitions. He offered empathy, humor, companionship, tools of human engineering far more effective than threats. By the time Victor introduced the idea of passing scientific information, Becker was already psychologically primed to rationalize it. He believed nothing he provided would harm national security. He believed the Soviets wanted technical parity, not dominance. He believed he was just sharing knowledge. But espionage rarely feels like espionage to those committing it. It feels like friendship, necessity, survival. In later years, intelligence psychologists would describe Becker's recruitment as a textbook example of relational leverage. Victor had never needed to intimidate him. He needed only to understand him. Despite Becker's cooperation, however, Every attempt to identify Victor ended in dead ends. The FBI even reached out to the CIA, hoping their foreign assets or defectors might recall a KGB officer matching Becker's physical description. As the Cold War thawed in the late 1980s, more Soviet officers defected, sharing details of their operations. But none recognized the man Becker described. That absence was its own clue. If no one knew Victor, he had likely been a deep-cover illegal, not stationed at the embassy, not listed in any Soviet diplomatic registry. These operatives lived in total compartmentalization. Only their handlers in Moscow knew their true identities. This would explain why Victor left so abruptly. After the compromise drop on November 9th, he likely followed KGB protocol: destroy communication channels, abandon the asset, and disappear. Moscow would have immediately shut down the Becker operation, isolating Victor to prevent further exposure. For the Soviets, losing one small intelligence channel was acceptable. Risking the exposure of an illegal officer was not. By the early 1980s, the FBI quietly closed the active portion of the case. Becker was in prison. The handler was gone. And the McDonald's in Alexandria returned to its usual life of family lunches, teenagers after school, commuters grabbing coffee, people entirely unaware that their booths and tables had once been the front line of spycraft. But even though the case had gone cold, it left a lasting mark. Internal FBI training began referencing the dead drop at McDonald's as a reminder that espionage often thrives in the places least suspected. Surveillance teams were advised to pay closer attention to third places: parks, fast food restaurants, libraries, malls, locations where strangers could interact or exchange objects without attracting attention. The Alexandria case helped reshape domestic counterintelligence techniques throughout the 1980s, contributing to the broader understanding that Russia's primary intelligence strength was not just technology, but human manipulation and patient, invisible methods. Years passed. The Cold War moved into its late phase. Reagan entered office. The arms race accelerated. The CIA lost and gained moles. The KGB itself fractured under internal pressures. But the unanswered question, who was Victor, continued to echo within the small circle of agents who had worked the case. Spy hunters, especially those who dedicated their careers to Soviet counterintelligence, rarely accepted loose ends. Every unidentified handler was a reminder that somewhere out there, a trained operative had escaped their grasp. Some agents believed Victor had fled the U.S. immediately. Others argued he had likely remained for years until his mission was repurposed. A few theorized he had already been operating under deep cover in another identity before Becker ever met him. But without evidence, all theories remained shadows. Even today, no declassified archive from Russia has ever confirmed the man's identity. The ghost of Alexandria still haunts the story. In the decades following the collapse of the Soviet Union, as archives cracked open and former intelligence officers resurfaced with memoirs, interviews, and quiet confessions, the Becker case resurfaced repeatedly among analysts reviewing forgotten operations of the Cold War. But unlike other espionage incidents, where defectors filled in the missing pieces, the Alexandria dead drop remained stubbornly opaque. No Russian officer ever claimed involvement. No KGB file leaked into the public domain referenced the operation. No transcript, no cable, no internal memo surfaced that matched the details described by David Becker. It was as if the operation had been swallowed by the void, the kind of silence only achieved through strict compartmentalization and deliberate erasure. To counterintelligence professionals, this outcome was both frustrating and telling. The absence of evidence did not mean the operation had been insignificant. It meant the opposite. In the KGB's world, only the most sensitive field operations were isolated so thoroughly that even decades later, their existence remained ghost-like. If the Soviets expunged Victor's identity, it suggested he was either too valuable to expose or too deeply embedded to risk discovery. And this implied something else. Becker's handler was almost certainly a highly trained illegal, one of the KGB's most secretive and elite operatives. Illegal officers were legends of Soviet intelligence, men and women who slipped into foreign countries under fabricated identities, built lives that seemed ordinary, and operated invisibly for years. They learned regional accents, cultural habits, and social rhythms. They avoided the embassy entirely, understanding that the smallest connection to official Soviet institutions could compromise them. If Victor was one of these operatives, his disappearance after November 9th was perfectly aligned with doctrine. He would have been instructed to sever the Becker line instantly and vanish into a new alias. The KGB did not tolerate risk. It eliminated it. For the FBI, this lingering mystery became a symbolic lesson. Not all battles fought in the Cold War yielded closure. Some simply underscored the complexity of an invisible conflict where victories were often incomplete and defeats were sometimes impossible to prove. The Alexandria dead drop was both a success and a failure. The FBI had identified the American source and stopped the leak, but the foreign officer, the one who orchestrated, trained, and commanded the operation, escaped untouched. Still, in the internal world of intelligence, the Becker case carried enormous influence. It reshaped protocols around contractor security vetting. Systems Analysis Corporation and other defense subcontractors underwent sweeping reforms. Background checks became more rigorous. Polygraphs were expanded. Access logs were scrutinized. Government documents that once circulated freely among mid-level analysts now required multi-tier clearance before reproduction. In a sense, Patricia Martinez's instincts in that McDonald's booth had created a domino effect that tightened national security across the entire defense sector. Patricia and Lisa, for their part, returned to ordinary life. They were thanked by FBI officials, invited briefly into a world few civilians ever glimpse, and then guided quietly back to anonymity. Their names never appeared in newspapers. Their involvement never became public record. The FBI viewed them as accidental heroes, crucial to the case, yet safer if the world never knew their faces. For years afterward, neither woman fully grasped the scale of what they had disrupted. They had exposed a Soviet operation that had likely funneled classified intelligence to Moscow for nearly 36 months. They had indirectly halted a channel that helped shape Soviet assessments of America's reconnaissance capabilities. And they had done so with nothing more than observation and courage. In the intelligence community, their actions became a private legend, the story of two fast food workers who outwitted a KGB system engineered to be flawless. Meanwhile, David Becker served his sentence quietly. He was neither a mastermind nor a hardened ideologue. He was something far more troubling, a reminder that espionage often begins not with fanaticism, but with vulnerability. Becker's psychological profile would later be used in training seminars as a cautionary case study of the unremarkable insider threat. A person who blends into their workplace, shows no outward red flags, and betrays their country not because they hate it, but because they feel trapped, overwhelmed, or unseen. After his release in November 1990, Becker disappeared from public life. He never wrote a memoir, never gave an interview. Former agents speculated he carried deep guilt or shame, or perhaps fear that Victor, or someone connected to him, might one day return. None ever did. The McDonald's where it all happened remained open until the late 1990s, before succumbing to the wave of suburban redevelopment that swept through Alexandria. The building was demolished, replaced by a strip mall, and eventually absorbed into a modern commercial landscape. No plaque marks the location. No sign hints at the clandestine exchanges that once unfolded beneath its fluorescent lights. Customers walk through the area unaware that they are crossing a former battlefield of Cold War espionage. The past leaves no footprints, where commerce paves over memory. Yet for those who studied the case, its legacy endures in a quiet, persistent truth. Espionage does not thrive in darkness. It thrives in plain sight. The KGB had found the perfect hiding place for intelligence transfers, not in alleys or safe houses, but in a restaurant where families ate cheeseburgers and office workers grabbed quick lunches. Tradecraft is most effective when it is invisible inside the ordinary. In the years that followed, U.S. counterintelligence adapted. More attention was directed at the vulnerabilities hidden in everyday spaces. Surveillance protocols were updated to consider the possibility that parks, restaurants, and suburban streets could serve as stages for espionage. Training programs emphasized that the human element, curiosity, intuition, observation, was often more powerful than the most advanced surveillance technology. If not for Patricia's decision to trust her instincts, the operation might have continued for years, undetected and unchallenged. Today, the Alexandria case stands as a reminder that intelligence failures and breakthroughs often hinge on the smallest observations: a misplaced bag, a pattern repeated too many times, a moment that didn't feel right. It teaches that the Cold War was never just about ideologies and arsenals. It was about the people caught between them, the agents, the analysts, the defectors, the traitors, the civilians, all moving through a world where the ordinary could turn extraordinary in an instant. And so the story ends where it began, in a place so familiar that no one thought to look twice. A McDonald's, a paper bag, a quiet exchange between two strangers, a single detail that broke an operation, a handler who vanished. A nation reminded that the front lines of espionage can appear anywhere, at any time, in forms no one expects. History often remembers the great confrontations, the summits, the crises, the treaties. But sometimes the defining moments happen quietly, unnoticed, in the background of everyday life. This was one of those moments.